Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you wish to interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. You can do one of two things. Either click that $ chat box in the comments section, or go to our website, gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, or just leave any burning questions, comments, or concerns you might have throughout the show in our comments section. I will read them on air. I love hearing your guys' opinion. I'm all ears. It's greatly appreciated. Just makes this show that much better. But without further ado, let us jump into our Waiver Wire segment, our second segment here on today's show. I love talking about the Waiver Wire, even as we get deeper and deeper into the season. All of these guys can still contribute to your fantasy team. For example, if you're still in the thick of a playoff run and are worried about finding certain options for your team to further supplement it, or just want even more of an edge and you're sitting pretty just waiting for the fantasy football playoffs to come, these players are all very intriguing in their own right, because now we're in the period of the year in the NFL where we know certain things about certain teams, and thus we know how certain players can be viewed on these teams. And so, importance-wise, it's going to be really intriguing how you guys think about it. So let me know what you think in the comments about these players, because they're from a wide range of different kinds of teams, whether they be contenders or teams who feel like they're kicking the can down the line to next year. So it's going to be a very intriguing segment as we go on throughout the year and we get deeper and deeper into the thick of it in the NFL playoff race and fantasy playoff race. Without further ado, let's jump right into this waiver wire segment. Starting off with a guy on a contender who can be a very underrated option. He's been a journeyman wide receiver in the league for several years, with the Raiders, with the Dolphins, finding a home in Buffalo, and looking like someone who, as the season gets into the playoff push, can be someone for this Buffalo team that can make a name for himself. And not for nothing, when I think about this Bills skill position group, if there are going to be certain injuries, quote-unquote the Amari Cooper one, to worry about, you're going to need some unsung heroes to step up, and that's what I think Mac Hollins can do. Leading receiver for the Bills in that game against Indy. No touchdowns though, but still finding his rhythm, being a reliable receiver, whether it be in late downs, in the red zone, in the middle of the field. Just someone who can be a security blanket at the wide receiver position for Josh Allen. And I think he's beginning to trust him more and more. Maybe that changes once Amari Cooper comes back and he becomes a weapon in his own right. But if things get awry with this Bills skill position group, Mac Hollins can be someone who can step up. He's an experienced receiver, like I said, been in many different offensive systems, perhaps this one being his most comfortable in terms of schematics. But at the end of the day, if you're a fantasy football manager, these are the kinds of players you want to look out for. Guys who can grow into their roles as the season goes on, especially if they're contenders and you know they're going to make deep playoff runs for you to monitor once the fantasy playoffs come along as well. And speaking of interesting receivers and interesting journeyman receivers, this time not necessarily a contender, but doing fantastic spot duty for this New Orleans team. How about Marquise Valdes-Scantling? I was really tempted yesterday to include him in my fantasy starts of the week, but I said no, I got to save him for my waiver wires because he's most likely still out there. Been someone who's been around the block in the NFL. Hasn't really found a home, but has had spurts of excellence throughout his career, whether it be with the Green Bay Packers, believe with the Raiders for a little bit of time as well, and now with the New Orleans Saints amidst their injury crisis in that wide receiver room. Rashid Shaheed out for a little bit, Chris Olave out for a little bit, Bub Means as well out for a little bit, and he steps up in that big game against the Falcons. Maybe not a win that you can say, well, they can get back on track and make a playoff push, but still a very positive win in the first game of the Darren Rizzi era for however long that is going to be. Just goes to show, sometimes, in moments of crisis are when unsung heroes rise from the ashes, and that's what MVS did. When the Saints needed him most, he really was someone that I feel like Derek Carr really appreciated in that game as an explosive play threat. And he could be, as the Saints either ride out the season or try and actually make a go of it. And so look out for him to, whether or not the Saints improve off this win or not, be someone who can be very effective from a fantasy perspective. Now let's go to kind of a bad take here. I did write this before the games happened, but I still feel like when I look at this Cowboys team, Cooper Rush still is the best option for them. I know a lot of people might be saying Trey Lance should play some more, see what they have in him, whether or not he can take over from Dak in the future. But I think for now, if you're the Cowboys, this season is over. So you gotta ride out Cooper Rush, who is technically the worst of the two in terms of raw talent and ability, but still can get the job done. That loss only dropped into 5-2 in his career, and it was against an Eagles team that's steadily improving, becoming a fearsome opponent, not just in the NFC East, but in the entire National Football League. But here's why Cooper Rush can still improve and still be the right answer for the Cowboys for the rest of the season. I think they have nothing to lose, and quite frankly, while the NFC East could be a tough division to navigate, I still feel like the Cowboys, can have some wins in them, can shock a couple teams. They play the Texans, a tough game, and the Commanders, another tough one. But they have the Giants, a Bengals defense that still hasn't really impressed me over the last couple of weeks, the Panthers, the Bucks, and they rounded the season with the Eagles and Commanders. So I feel like this schedule is one in which Cooper Rush, the more experienced hand, can at least semi-thrive in, if not, be serviceable enough to keep them in games. And so that's why I feel like I'm not necessarily pressing the panic button on Cooper Rush just yet. And I'll mention this a little bit later in another segment about him as well. But he still is the most competent option, in my opinion, in that QB room for Dallas right now. And then let's go into a little bit more NFC East flavor here. Jeremy McNichols. Let's talk about this guy, because I think I talked about him a little bit before in this segment a couple weeks ago, where I talked also about the depth and versatility of that Washington Commanders running back room. I've really been impressed with him as someone who can supplement what Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr. can bring in for the time being, actually being, I believe, still the RB2 as Brian Robinson's recovering from injury. Don't quote me on that. But he still, even as an RB3, is someone who has great effect in this roster for Washington, especially in the red zone. Very physical kind of guy. Also has a little bit of explosiveness in his game. Maybe not someone who can, in the open field, make big plays like an Eckler can, but still someone who, when you look at running back rooms around the league, is perhaps the best RB3 a team could possibly have. And if you're the Commanders and you really think you've got something going on offense, chances are, in the playoffs, Jaden Daniels is going to look a little bit flustered. And so you're going to need this running back room to truly supplement him, to lift him up, to elevate him once they get into the playoffs. So look for Jeremy McNichols to be a big part of that in that rotation. And last but not least, let's talk about a young man in the NFC West. Truly miraculous story. Ricky Pearsall. Someone who, like I said, suffered a nearly fatal gunshot wound. In fact, doctors said it was miraculous that he was still alive. Now playing football, catching his first ever NFL touchdown. It's truly remarkable to see where he was on that fateful night to now performing admirably in a 49ers uniform. just someone who I feel like for the 49ers is just another depth piece for them to utilize in that very scary offense when it is healthy, I might add. But still, if Ricky Pearsall can be another great generational wide receiver talent that the 49ers can develop, look out, because yes, there's going to be a lot of contract situations in the very near future that the 49ers have to figure out, but Ricky Pearsall's a gem. I feel like he can really be one of the better receivers they have found and developed through all these drafts in the Shanahan era. And if they tie down Brock Purdy and say, okay, we're going to have to cut some of our losses here, get rid of some guys, I feel like Ricky Pearsall can step in and fill, say, a Brandon Ayuk or Jawan Jennings' shoes because of how versatile he can be. And if that performance against Tampa Bay stands up against the test of time, we're going to be sitting here thinking that Ricky Pearsall can be someone who you would draft, potentially even in, say, the 4th or 5th round of a fantasy draft in years to come. And if you're in a dynasty league, you should be really looking at him heavily because of that opportunity for growth. Now, obviously, this 49ers offense is still having a little bit of struggles, even though Christian McCaffrey is fully back from that tendonitis issue. I still feel like, this is one of those opportunities where the 49ers can still tinker with a lot of what they do schematically on offense. And so, Ricky Pearsall, this isn't just a aberration. This isn't just a one-trick pony performance. This is something that I think can continue as the season goes on, because I think that this wide receiver room and this scheme is so versatile and versatile enough for a guy like Ricky Pearsall to be noticeable. Let me know what you think in the comments about this. I feel like all of these players that I talked about can help you along the stretch, especially if you're just looking to supplement your team and you're sitting high and mighty in first place or second in your fantasy rankings, or you're kind of in the middle of the pack and want to make a playoff push. All of these players, I believe, can help you no matter what their real-life situations are and what your fantasy situation is. So, before we go into a quick break, just remember, chess is similar to fantasy. You always have to think ahead. And so, you may not like many of these players that I've just mentioned, but I feel like you have to be proactive no matter where you are in the standings. And so, just take this with a grain of salt, because some of this might not work out. But still, proactivity is key in the fantasy football world. But when we come back from our short break, we're going to be continuing our positional rankings with the running back position. Who do I think will shine the brightest in that department when we come back?